The beginning of my story is in California, in Bakersfield, California. And I joined the LDS Church at the age of 8, 1978. And I guess that's, my connection with the church began there. Before that, I had grown up Episcopalian. And when we had the church elders come to our door and talk to us about the church, we were all very excited to learn about the things that the church was about, the ideas and the beliefs of the church. We moved to Utah in 1980, and it was at that time when I began to understand a different side of the church. I guess for me, it was unique to see the difference in the cultures, and for me, I started to have a very different take on the church. One of the things that attracted me to the church was that the people we had come into contact with were very welcoming, very open, and that seemed to change when we moved to Utah. People were still by and large welcoming, but there was this undertone that seemed to be very different from what my experience was in California. It was shortly after we moved here, when I was about 13, that I started to really struggle with my understanding of myself and my gender identity, and had began to notice a shift in what was expected of me through the church. And so it was at that time that I started to go into interviews with the bishop and have discussions about my identity and who I was as a person. And it became apparent that I wasn't ready to have a discussion with my bishop about my gender identity being female. And I began to realize that I needed to protect myself. And for me, it was time to exit the church. And so I really, after about the age of 13, stopped attending the LDS church. And things got a little bit rougher from that point. I think I started to feel a sense of a lot of shame, a lot of internalized shame after that. And I knew that I was kind of in trouble. I didn't know where to turn. Part of the problem at that time was that we really didn't have a language that would describe what I was experiencing. We didn't have words like transgender and things like that. And certainly I was very aware that being transgender was not looked upon favorably. To put a little light on that, I think about the age of 4 was when I started to really understand my gender identity was outside of the context of a male identity, and I had some pretty strong indicators that that wasn't going to be a path that worked out really well for me. And I've made some attempts from that age on to try and find what little piece I could to attach to. When I went middle school and high school, began a very rough phase of my life. High school, I really had my first suicide attempt. And a lot of that was directly linked to the shame I felt about the fact that I was, by society's measure, an abomination. And of course now I completely reject such notions, but at the time it was a very powerful message that kept subjugating my identity and keeping me from my ability to really find peace within myself. So I continued struggling through that and kept doing what I could to push that part of myself away, and did a very good job of it. But I kept having these problems. A lot of it I turned to less effective means of coping with it, substance use and things like that, which absolutely did no benefit for me. So at the age of 21, it was at this point where I once again felt like I was a horrible person for for feeling the way I did, and I put a loaded gun to my head and decided, that it was time to end that. I luckily made the decision at that time that I couldn't carry through with it. And in my mind's eye, I decided that I had in fact killed myself. And what I was going to do is change my course, and I was going to find a way to be happy in life. And that was a good thing, because it led me to some very beneficial paths for me. And that's when I started turning to wilderness, and I started backcountry skiing. I started really getting into my skiing and backpacking and hiking up in the wilderness, and eventually that led to a whole host of things like whitewater rafting and climbing. And the climbing ended up being the thing that taught me about myself the most. It really taught me that I have a courage that I never understood before that point. And when you're up hundreds of feet above the ground and it's only you up there that can make it, the difference of whether you're going to fall and possibly be hurt, or whether you're going to make the next move, that is quite terrifying. It takes a special something to get inside yourself and to really leap for those next holds that you can't see. And when you pull yourself through something like that, you start to realize that you can overcome things that you never thought were possible before that. And so I started to really learn this side of myself, that I was capable of a lot more than I'd ever dreamt. And I started to really learn a lot about myself, but I still hadn't quite accepted myself. I began that process, and it wasn't until probably about 5-6 years ago that I started to really bog down in this, where I hit a point where I couldn't really move beyond. And a lot of that had to do with the discussion with my own children, and telling them to love themselves, and telling them that they needed to treat themselves good. And all the while I'm having this discussion with my oldest son, knowing that I wasn't doing that for myself, and knowing that I really hadn't been honest with myself. And so I eventually started taking a good hard look at things. And when I started looking back and knowing that before there was any idea of this being something that could be sexualized, even though society labels such things as transsexualism and things like that, this had nothing to do with sexuality. This had everything to do with identity. And so I began to look at my childhood and understand that there was something there that was very significant from my childhood, and that I couldn't dismiss that. It was time to really be honest with myself. And that led to a very difficult reality, that I started to understand myself within the framework of transgender. And my story started to match up with other stories, and I soon started to find that there was so much that we shared, and I couldn't deny that. It was a very painful awakening to realize that I had lived some 30-odd years in my life pushing this very integral part of myself out of my very being, that nobody had really come to understand me as a person, and that in fact I may have lived and died without anybody ever knowing who the person was that inhabited this body. Was really quite striking and scary. And I knew that I had to do something to really change that, because I wanted people to know who I really was. But that led to about a 2 to 3 year bout with depression, and once again feeling very suicidal. And I went through about 2 years of waking up day and night hoping that I could make it through one day at a time. Trying to figure out how I was going to do this was just terrifying. It's something that you have no idea how you're going to get through. You just know you have to do it. And unfortunately, a short period after I began that process, I had my first actual suicide attempt, where I took a lot of pills and had gone to sleep thinking that I had succeeded in extinguishing my own life. To my dismay, I woke up the next morning and I had just a hell of a headache and felt horrible, and realized what I had done was was just absolutely unacceptable. And it took me a while before I started telling people around me. Nobody knew. And I finally came to the acceptance that I had to do something about what I was living with, and that I had to live my life for me, that I had to find that space within myself. That meant I had a connection with this earth that was actually mine. And that was going to be a painful process. I knew that I could risk my employment, my family, that I could end up like a lot of transgender people that I had read about, that I could end up alone and homeless on the streets. And that was very terrifying. I also knew that transgender people were murdered at a very high rate. And that was also scary to accept, that somehow I was signing on for this. But I made that leap of faith. And I decided I was going to tell people who I was and make sure that I lived my life to the fullest, and I did. My boys have absolutely been amazing through this process. It was shortly after this time that my oldest son was about ready to be baptized into the LDS church, and my now ex-wife was having a discussion with him about what it meant to be baptized. And they had a discussion about the church's stand on people like my friend who were homosexual and people like myself. And after that discussion, she decided that, he decided that he didn't want to be baptized into the church, because it didn't make any sense to him how there could be such a contrast between the message of Christianity and what was being told to him about the way that people were being treated. And so it was really striking that, as I was going through this process, my 8-year-old son had came to a conclusion that was really quite profound, that this wasn't the way Christ would treat people. And this, in fact, was quite the opposite of what you would expect. I have 2 amazing boys. I'm absolutely proud of both of them. And we have an amazing relationship. We spend a lot of time together, and they've absolutely, they get it. They understand that people need to be who they are and should be loved for who they are, and that we can meet people where they're at instead of making them conform. One of the things that is very striking about my journey and what happened after I decided to go through this process of self-acceptance. Some people call it a transition. I call it a letting go. I let go of something that was very burdensome to me, and that was the expectation for me to live up to a male expectation. A lot of that was very much had to do with the LDS church and priesthood, and the idea that that is a very sacred institution, and I never belonged there. And so it was really interesting as I came to understand myself that I let go of that. But eventually I did lose my job shortly after I began the transition process, and that led to a period of time where I couldn't find anyone that was really willing to give me a chance to have a job. And so I spent about a year being homeless, and I eventually did find employment, but there was a period of time where I slept on the streets of Salt Lake City in an effort to maintain my ability to go to school. At the time I was working on an associate's degree in Salt Lake Community College. When I transferred up to the University of Utah, I was literally sleeping on park benches and going to class in the morning. It was, I think, the most surreal points in my life to show up in a classroom where, people are still rubbing the sleep out of their eye, and you just came off of a park bench and you're kind of looking around you wondering, how did I get here? And knowing that at the end of the day I was going back out to the streets. Eventually I found someone who was very dear to me that gave me an opportunity for employment, and that's really what it takes. I mean, it takes a community, it takes people to help address these issues of homelessness, and for a lot of transgender people there is a huge amount of homelessness. I was fortunate that I had a community of people that helped put me back up on my feet, and it took a lot of people at the right times to get me into a position to where now I'm working on a PhD, starting here in a couple of months at the University of Utah. I just finished up a master's degree, and I serve on 3 boards, including Equality Utah, the Mental Health Advisory Board at the Pride Center, and Transgender Education Advocates of Utah. I'm really proud of the work that I've done. I've spent a lot of time educating the community about something that had struck me in this process. When I learned about intersex people, I was just floored that I'd never heard about this segment of our population before. And here was this whole idea that people never really existed in these binary terms, which I'd been led to believe was absolute all these years. And so I spent a lot of my time talking about what that means, talking about the need to stop altering children's genitalia just so that they can fit an ideal, the need for inclusion in our society of all sorts of people, including people who don't fit our ideas of binary gender. And recently, I had the pleasure of working with the LDS Church in Sanpete County to try and talk about this issue. And I think that that's where this discussion needs to go, that all of God's children need to be acknowledged, that we've got to quit burying our heads in the sand, and that we got to take a look at what's really going on and be honest about what we see. And the fact of the matter is that there is a lot more to humans than simply putting everybody in the box of male or female. That there are people who exist between and around those identities. When I look at the pain and suffering that is all around us, I think about the idea that every day in the state of Utah, there are 10 people admitted to an emergency room or a hospital for attempted suicide. That every day in this state, there's probably someone that committed suicide. We have around 450 suicides in this state every year. And we have about 22 youth suicides between the ages of 15 and 19. I think there's something very wrong, but we don't talk about those things. We talk about other things. And this needs to be part of the discussion. And this is why I keep raising the issues, is because I work with a lot of individuals from that community and from the demographic of LGBT, and I hear their stories, and I know that a lot of people are still continuing to struggle with the shame. I wish there was more that we could do to create an atmosphere where our communities are healing themselves, where we talk about inclusion, we talk about mental health, we talk about depression. It's not a secret, it's not something we have to hide. That's how we work our way out of this, is through supporting each other, but it seems like the atmosphere is anything but that. Mostly it's the silence that scares me, that we can't have these discussions. And I very much, for many years, have wanted to have this discussion. I've been fortunate that I have a mother who's able to balance her faith in the LDS Church with her love for me, which I think is all that's ever been needed, is really love. You know, it's a really simple concept. You know, I think Christianity, I think love. But she's been absolutely amazing in her support for me as her daughter, and being able to let go of her expectations for the person she thought was going to be her son. It's really a profound idea to think about letting go of that and all the expectations that a parent must have for their child. Each one of us, when a child's born, you know. But for her, she has absolutely been amazing in her support for me. And I'm really excited that she's made the decision to talk today, because I think she has a lot of things that are just really powerful to say. Where I'm at today is living fully. I think absolutely engaged with my life. I could have never dreamt what an amazing place I would arrive at, that I could touch so many lives and I could get the opportunities that I've had to pursue a PhD. When 4 years ago I was sleeping on the streets of Salt Lake. I'm absolutely happy with where I'm at in life, the relationships I've had, and even though I've lost some really important relationships, I'm able to love because I'm able to accept myself and love myself for who I am, and it's something I never thought was possible before.